Well, I think, well, one thing in terms of vocabulary and a lot of things, and I don't write down to kids. And
Mhm,
C.S. Lewis had talked about that. If you think you're writing for children, in a specific way of writing down for kids,
mhm.
then you're doing them a disservice, and you're probably not creating a very good story.
Welcome to the Homeschool Connections podcast. I'm your host, Kaitlin Zara, and I'm so glad you're spending some time with me today. New episodes drop every week, so make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell if you're watching on YouTube. All right, mamas, grab your coffee, press play, and let's homeschool together. I am so excited to welcome Paul McCusker to the show today, a talented writer, director, and producer. His storytelling has shaped generations, and today we get to talk all about enriching your homeschool with the power of storytelling. Paul, thanks so much for being here.
It's a pleasure being with you, Caitlin. Thank you.
Paul, I want to start at the very beginning. How did you discover the power of storytelling, and what made you pursue it as a vocation?
Well, I suppose like most families, I mean, I was exposed to stories as a young child before I could read or write. I mean, stories were read to me, told to me, and of course, I responded to those. I remember actually in our neighborhood, there was a woman that often just sat on her steps and she would read Winnie the Pooh to the neighborhood kids. And I loved storytelling. And then when I could sort of read and write, I began to express myself through creatively, through stories,
Mhm.
through poems, through drawings, through whatever. And that impulse, and it was very hard to explain, like anything. Why would I be inclined to move in that direction as opposed to others? But when it comes to the power of storytelling, I think I think the power becomes manifested. I mean, everybody understands the power of a story, whether you can articulate what that power is. I mean, Jesus certainly did. I mean, we often can use that example that Jesus proclaimed and then he told parables. And often there are people who know of Jesus and they know his parables, even sometimes over and beyond his proclamations. You know, so he could declare things, but then he would say, "Once upon a time," essentially. Once upon a time, there was a man with two sons. Once upon a time, there was a traveler on this lonely road. And he would go into stories. And I think there is something inherently interesting to us as soon as somebody even starts
Mhm.
a once upon a time. As
Yeah.
soon as somebody starts a story, as long as they fulfill the promise of the story, we're immediately drawn to it. And I think that's what drew me. And I think my impulse was primarily probably selfish and probably still is selfish in that I just there's this impulse to express myself creatively, so I do. That I have actually had jobs where I'm getting paid to do that makes it even better. But I'd do it as a hobby, even if I didn't have a job doing it, because the power of it works at so many levels.
Yeah.
It slips past often our normal guards. If you express or declare an idea, we almost immediately have an acceptance or rejection of the idea, even if sometimes we go, well, I have to think about that. But there was a pastor, Eugene Peterson, who called storytelling's often had what he called time bombs, where there would be a theme or an idea, and you get so enamored by the story that sometimes that theme or idea would go off later like a time bomb. So
Mhm.
suddenly, when Jesus is talking about a man with two sons,
Mhm.
and then it's all about, forgiveness, acceptance. It's about a lot of things. And you're thinking, oh, it's just a story about a man with two sons. And then later you go, oh, he was talking about God. Oh,
Mhm.
that's what it was. And so stories bypass the normal defenses a lot of times. And we're just more
Absolutely.
accepting. And then that makes us more open to ideas we might not otherwise be open to.
Yeah, absolutely. And beautifully said. I feel so much like you do, Paul. I will say in my homeschool, storytelling, reading aloud to my sons, no matter how old they get, is definitely already my favorite part of what we
Hmm.
do at home. And I want to know you have created, obviously, these very compelling stories for children through adventures in Odyssey. But what do you think makes a story truly stick in a child's heart and mind? I know as homeschool parents, we're really trying to navigate the library and bookstores, and ordering great books for our kids is really
Mhm.
important to us. How do we pick a great story? How do we find one that will really, like I said, stick in a child's heart and mind?
Well, I think, as a basic rule, stories, someone once said, either helps us forget about our lives, entertains us away
Mm,
from our troubles or whatever,
yep.
forget about our lives, or gives us insight into our lives.
Mhm,
And if it does both, sometimes that's good. But if it does neither, then it's not a good story.
mhm,
If it's not entertaining in the best possible senses of being entertaining, and that is compelling characters, a plot line that engages you, all of the factors that we learn in English 101 about what makes for a good story, a good beginning, middle, and end. All of those things contribute to a good story. But I think, especially for us, I think as believers, it's going to be the meaning behind the story. Are they meaningful? What's our takeaway? Was it just cotton candy and you went, okay, that was a good read, but
right.
I didn't take anything away from it. I wasn't aware of
Mhm,
anything affecting me for better or for worse.
mhm,
But when you have something that you read or that you buy for your kids, it's good to know what the meaning is. What's the intent of the author? What's behind the story? That what I love about kids is that they are so perceptive. They are absorbing a lot more than we like to think that they are. And so even in stories, like stories that I did for Adventures in Odyssey, stories that I know
mhm.
now and that I'm writing now, it's often the kids get what I'm doing before the adults do.
How
And
cool is that?
and I think though that makes us well, we should be more cautious as parents because that means they
Mhm,
are picking things up. And so we do want to screen as best as we can, go to trustworthy sources. So you have a good story, as in it's well told, and then you have a good story, as in its morality is in line with God's morality. It's in line with our morality as parents and their morality, hopefully, as readers. And I think that's what we want, the double good,
yeah.
well told, well presented, but also the good and the sense of a moral meaning behind what they're doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And for us homeschoolers, we've got this very unique situation, right? Where we have the freedom to explore our
Yeah.
curriculum and the way that we structure our days. And I want to know, Paul, why do you think storytelling is such an important educational tool for all children and especially for homeschoolers?
Well, I think because of what we said before, which is if it's well done, well presented, has all the things that bring meaning to our kids' lives, to our lives, then that means it is also by default an educator. Now, sometimes I've found that stories that attempt first and foremost to educate often do so at the expense of good characters and good plot. It's like
Mm-hmm.
getting so lost in, here's what I'm trying to preach, here's what I'm trying to teach,
Right.
that it becomes these morality lessons that are less compelling as stories,
Mm-hmm.
and you can still use them as a tool, but sometimes the story aspects are compromised by the desire to teach. But as I said, if you have stories that are aligned in terms of well crafted, well told, and then the moral meaning behind them intact, then there is an education going on. All creators, I believe, whether you're a painter, writer, whatever we are expressing a story. Well, we're expressing, I want to say, a worldview through story,
Mm-hmm.
whether we mean to or not, whether we even know what that is or not. You've got a lot of writers who just say, "Oh yeah, I just created it and threw it out." When they say, "What does it mean?" They go, "I have no idea." Well, actually, whether they know or not, something's bubbling to the top. Something's coming to the forefront of what they believe about the world. What do they believe about God? What do they believe about
Yeah.
humanity? What do we believe about trust or betrayal or all of these things, good versus bad? And all those things emerge in a story, whether we intend it or not. In fact, with Adventures in Odyssey, we would often say, well, we need to do a story about a theme of friendship. And then we'd start writing the story and we would work out a story because we want it to be good. And by the end of the story, we would be reading and reviewing and go, oh, wait a minute, that's not the theme here. The
Right.
theme isn't about friendship. This is actually about something else. So a different theme emerged out of that. Now we then go back and rewrite and shore up the theme that became clear. Well, for homeschoolers, and I think for anyone, but especially where you're tying in the homeschool world, not just, the 6, 8 hours a day in a classroom at a school, it's a lifestyle. It's an
Yes.
entire integration of your reality at home. And because of that, then the integration of morality with stories, what you're using, is vital. And the thing about story too is it educates, but it also explores. So it opens for discussion. And this to
Mm.
me was a huge thing that we learned in doing Adventures in Odyssey, for example. We would hear from families and parents, and there are a lot of homeschoolers who know Odyssey. And they would listen to an episode and they found that the kids were more willing to talk about themselves and their day and their deeper feelings, even if it had nothing to do with the episode. There was
How
something about that
interesting.
world of storytelling that would allow the kids to relax. And then they would talk about something they were anxious about, or
Mhm.
something that happened with a friend that upset them, or things that they might otherwise have said to a parent, oh, no, my day was fine. Is everything all right? Yeah, it's fine.
Mhm.
But something about story brings out the deeper feelings, deeper thoughts, I think hopefully insights. And then that becomes part of the education. It's just not facts all the time. It is going to be facts combined with meaning, combined with the bigger picture of what we believe about God and our place in his story.
Absolutely incredible, Paul. I love what you said. Two things you said, that homeschooling is a lifestyle. Nothing could be more true. That's
Hmm.
absolutely, absolutely how us homeschoolers view what we do. And the fact that storytelling, just like you said, even though the child might not have experienced anything like the themes in the story that they had listened to, it did evoke in them some emotion that allowed them to open up. And as homeschooling parents, we strive for connection and we strive for the ability to have those eye to eye, sitting next to each other on the couch conversations that will shape their education and their faith and their lives. And how sometimes we struggle to get those conversations with our children started,
Hmm.
and how incredible and how insightful it is that you were able to see that children really opened up when they listened to these stories.
Hmm.
How incredible.
Yeah.
So now, when parents are using stories in their homeschool, we usually defer right to books, right? That is
Hmm.
what most of us think storytelling should be, whether it's our children reading to themselves or reading aloud. But dramatizations, oral storytelling, even just sharing family memories that are passed down through the generations, how can this be a part of an actual homeschool education and curriculum?
Well, I think it has to be intentional first and
Mm,
foremost. If you're sort of waiting for it to slip in somewhere, it's
right.
like anything with a well-planned day. You figure out where you want to tell stories and where you want those presented. So they could be read. You have your reading time if you want.
Mhm.
But there are all the audio dramas now, and I've produced a lot of them, and they've expanded beyond Odyssey to, lots of other things, including this new world of Hope Springs that I've developed with the Augustine Institute. And so if one thing is intentional, where is it best placed? Where do you want to use story in any form in your day, in between things, or to complement a particular teaching idea or something? You can come at things sideways with stories. So if you're teaching, X, then the Y and Z could be the story that's going to kind of
Mhm.
come alongside X and help kids imagine it and perceive it and take on the meaning in a more important way. And then even as we say that, you're right, the oral storytelling, I mean, our cultural memory and sometimes family memory is
Mhm.
difficult to maintain. I was with family just this past weekend back in Pennsylvania, where I was born. I still have a lot of family there. And I found myself asking a lot of questions to get stories out of them about things from the past because I wanted to hear the stories told. And I also wanted everyone to remember what the stories are. And I'm amazed because you have adults who, if you say to them, how did your parents meet?
Yeah.
and they don't know.
They don't
They
know.
don't know.
Mhm.
And if you just ask, like, what is your name? Where does your name come from? Why did your parents name you that? I ask these kinds of questions because I'm interested, because I think there's a story behind it, and I'm always interested in what the stories are. And this is it's so important, especially the opportunity in the homeschool world, because it's so integrated with life and with the people who are engaged in it, whether it's parents and it's trusted friends, whoever is doing the teaching and the engaging. You have a great opportunity to unpack. And I'll tell you, this is one thing that I'm trying to do with Hope Springs, and that is create that understanding of our place in God's story
Mm.
and our place in just history. It didn't start, history didn't start because I was born. I stepped into the flow of a river. I've stepped into a flow of something, of
Mhm.
things that preceded me and things that will follow me. And in your family life, it's the same thing. These things didn't spring out of nothing. Our children and our environment, everything about our homes has sprung out of the stories that often preceded us. What happened with our grandparents? What happened with our parents? What's happening with us? And those kinds of things are great stories, number one, but they also teach a lot. And they'll teach the kids that the world is not singularly about them, but that they are stepping into a flow of something bigger than they are. And I
Yes.
think at a young age, especially, that's vital, because we live in a very narcissistic age where it all seems to be about me,
Yep.
when in fact, no, we're just a part of something much bigger.
Absolutely, Paul. And I loved hearing that story of you visiting family and asking questions.
Hmm.
And so much of what you said about being intentional about where our stories come in and how that adds value to our homeschool. It reminded me of last school year.
Mm.
My son's co op had an international night where you could pick a country and study it. And we thought, let's do America. Does that count? You normally think, right, Paul, that when you're going to do an international night, maybe you'd study another country. But I said,
Hmm.
why not study our own?
Yeah.
And when we did, it gave me a chance to tell my son about my grandfather, who he never got to meet.
Hmm.
And he was a World War II veteran. And he actually had his right arm blown off in
Hmm.
combat. And he was a highly decorated war veteran.
Mm.
And I got to tell him that story in a in the context of something we were doing for school and with the intentionality, like you mentioned, it really stuck. And
Mm.
both of my sons have asked me numerous times to retell that story. We'll be driving in the car and they'll say, "Can you tell us again about your grandpa Victor? Can you tell us what happened with his arm? Tell us what his family did after. Tell us about the awards that he won, the medals that he won." They have asked numerous times because that story was told to them in a way that really resonated with them. It really struck them
Mm.
in the heart. And they were really touched by it. And again, if my children had been in a more traditional school setting, I wouldn't have had the blessing of sharing that story with them the way that I did.
Right. And that's the thing about context. I guess maybe that's the word, is it gives kids a greater context than just their immediate reality. Because
Mhm.
often as kids, we're in the house we're in, but we don't know why we're in that house. We don't even know why we're in that neighborhood. We don't
Mhm.
know the history of the neighborhood or the history of the town or much about anything around us,
Right.
because it's just a given. I'm here. This is my reality. But when you expand that, and suddenly the parents are saying, well, we moved here because this, we chose this house because of these reasons. We wanted you to have your own room or to share with your brother or to whatever the case may be. And then you expand from that into the realities of the town around. Whatever your town is, it
Mhm.
has history. Unless it just suddenly sprung up in the last, decade, there's a deep history. I discovered, for example, outside of my hometown, that
Mhm.
there was an important battle in the French Indian
Mm.
War with George Washington. So he was there, that led to some things that were incredibly important to George Washington throughout his career in the military and as a
Mhm.
president, because of this one battle in this town. I didn't fully appreciate that, but it does give me context. I just
Mhm.
look and go, okay, things preceded me, but then you zero in on the very intimate family information, the kinds of,
Mhm.
things like well, why did we move from here to here when I was 8 years old? What
Yeah.
changed that we went from this place to that place? There's a story there. There's a reason behind it. And then we lived there. And then what happened when we left, and what happened,
Mm.
as I grew up, what happened to me there, and how did that shape who I am as a human being, as a writer, as a person? It's all of that's important, but we get so busy with the day to day.
Yeah, we
And we
do.
get so busy with the facts. We are a sort of a data driven. It's funny. We're a funny culture because right now, on one hand, we seem to be data driven, like we're
Hmm.
all widgets. Whether you're going to the doctor or the store or whatever,
Hmm.
and we're consumers and we're widgets. And then it's hyper emotionalism on the other direction. It's like the
Yep.
middle ground is getting lost to us. And that's the opportunity, especially with homeschooling, because you have the freedom and ability to shape everything with a deeper meaning than just the facts or the agenda that might be happening in a public school
Yeah.
system or in another school system.
Absolutely. There's so much richness in those stories, just like you said. And I think for a lot of us adults, maybe, Paul, you're probably better at this than most of us, but sometimes we have regrets when family members have passed on and those stories are lost. And
Uh,
so this is our opportunity as homeschoolers with young children still at home to preserve those incredible stories that really give so much context for the world around us. I love that. So, Paul, I'm sure as you have created all of these incredible things over the years, you've also seen that the world has shifted, like you said, it's changing. And in a world of screens and unfortunately for our kids, short attention spans,
mhm.
how can parents help their kids develop a deep love for stories and for imagination? Hey, friends! If you're looking for a little extra help in your Catholic homeschooling, check out Homeschool Connections. They've got live and recorded online classes for just about every subject, taught by instructors who really know their stuff and really love their faith. From a curious elementary school child to a teen getting ready for college, and every age in between, they've got you covered. Head on over to homeschoolconnections.com to learn more.
Well, the first thing is to turn off all the screens, and really to get more disciplined about the devices in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Hard, because we always tend to take the path of least resistance. We tend to go with what's convenient, and they have made our lives very convenient with these things, and we use them all the time. The unintended consequence, or maybe it was someone's intention, if you read the various books, our brains remake themselves to the world around us. So, like the printing press, when the printing press showed up, brains actually changed to allow for the fact that people were reading, that people had an opportunity to read at a level they didn't. Before that, it
Mm-hmm.
was oral and primarily visual. And visual in terms of symbols or statues or paintings or drawings
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. But once you got past the printing press, our brains shaped for words. It's shaped for reading. Well, our brains are shaping now, and we've all
Mm-hmm.
experienced that. The ability to sit down and just stop to read for anything more than a few, because we've become conditioned to short paragraphs, boom, boom, boom. Everything's just sort of
Mm-hmm.
there. And part of that, I think, and it's a huge talent. So I don't take this lightly.
Mm-hmm.
And the challenge is to maintain all the disciplines. So, and by
Mm-hmm.
disciplines, I mean the highest point of engagement between, let's say, what we're looking at in our
Mm-hmm.
imagination is reading.
Mm-hmm.
Reading is we're taking symbols, converting those symbols into letters, into words, into paragraphs, which create meaning and we understand, and it stimulates the brain and the imagination. A well-told story is stimulating the brain in so many different ways, as where we are forced to imagine what these symbols on a piece of paper are telling us.
Mm-hmm.
Then you move on from there, and I suppose stage plays would be the next, because if you and let's say you mentioned it before, dramatize stories in
Mm-hmm.
your classrooms, in your situation, suddenly two chairs becomes a living room.
Yep.
And you don't your brain fills in this very sparse unless it's
Mm-hmm.
laid out to great detail, or somebody's holding a cardboard sword, but you think of it as a real sword. I mean, our brains do that. Our imaginations fill in the pieces. Audio drama's next because
Hmm.
what it presents is sound and dialogue and music, and then the brain is filling in the rest of that and creating pictures. In fact,
Absolutely.
and then you move into screens.
Hmm.
And screens, apart from the tool of, text on screen and things like that and how that's done, but once you move into TV and movies, everything is being presented. And
Hmm.
so the more that's being presented to you, the less the imagination has to work. So that muscle that is our imagination can become a
Hmm.
bit flabby
Yep.
because we are not engaging it at the more intense level where we have to work harder. So
Hmm.
honestly, I'm not necessarily a turn everything off and withdraw, but I think it behooves us to figure out the right, almost like a meal, the right balance of
Hmm.
nutrition
Yep.
between how much reading is going on and maybe live engagement and then maybe audio, oral, and then screen time, and use all of them. Because I think for our future, we need them anyway. If you're going to have a
Hmm.
career, you can't walk into careers having not participated in a bunch of things and
Hmm.
become aware of them. So for preparing our kids for the world morally and in way of education, a real balanced approach to devices and books, and maybe that's the way to do it. You go, okay,
I agree.
for every 15 minutes you spend on a device, spend 15 minutes reading a book too. I don't know. I wish I had better answers than all that.
No,
That's part of it.
I think it's great advice, and I think that as parents are working to find the balance in their homes and with their individual children, I think it's great advice. And like you said, when you're planning a meal, maybe screen time is a little dessert at the end. It's a little sweet treat,
Oh, yeah.
but we really want to work that muscle. Like you said, it's a muscle that we don't want to get flabby. So
Yeah, and
let that muscle keep working.
my daughter's an assistant with a local Catholic preschool. And
Mhm.
I'll tell you, over the last 2 to 3 years, for her as one who regularly engages with kids, she gets genuinely annoyed if we are at a restaurant
Yeah.
because eating time, when you look at the Bible
Mhm.
and how often food is involved in the most
Yes.
important conversations, the most important engagement between people, food is huge. And so
Yeah.
when you've got a family at a table and most of them are on their individual screens, it's a problem, especially for little kids.
Yep.
And we'll do it supplementally in my family, and even then it can be annoying. It's like, well, what's the weather tomorrow? Oh, well, I'll just take a look.
I
Oh, what
know.
happened in the news? What's this, that, and the other thing? And so you
Mhm.
just go to the source because you don't have to guess about it. But when you've got kids at the table, engagement is vital. Play the best and worst
Yeah.
game. Don't go to that. Just go, what's the best thing and the worst thing about your day to day?
Yeah.
We used to do that when my kids were smaller and do it without judgment because sometimes
Mhm.
the best and the worst, as parents, we want to lecture about, well, if you'd done this, it would have been better. No, what we want is
Mhm.
just to hear them articulate their day. So
Absolutely.
put the devices away and do best and worst. And everybody likes to talk about themselves. So kids
Mhm.
will. It'll be, so
Yes.
what was the best thing today? What's the worst thing? Whatever
Great
that
tip.
may be, and then you move on from there. But yeah, I think at meal times and specific family engagement opportunities, get rid of the distractions, whatever those
Mhm.
distractions may be.
Absolutely, Paul. Mealtimes naturally, like you said, invite conversation and
Mhm.
storytelling. So, what about the nitty gritty, the things that us homeschoolers are maybe worried about sometimes, like vocabulary and critical thinking, those things that we want to maybe check a box for our homeschool curriculum? How does storytelling do that for us? Specifically, like I said, vocabulary and critical thinking.
Well, I think, well, one thing in terms of vocabulary and a lot of things, and I don't write down to kids. And
Hmm.
C.S. Lewis had talked about that. If you think you're writing for children, in a specific way of writing down for kids,
Hmm.
then you're doing them a disservice, and you're probably not creating a very good story. The
Definitely.
fact is, when I'm writing for kids, I'm sensitive about themes and ideas that are beyond them by way of their experience or their understanding, and I also don't want to
Hmm.
supplant parents in terms of introducing things that might upset the parents because the
Sure.
parents are like, wait a minute, that's too that's beyond what I would like my kids
Mm-hmm.
to be engaging in. But I am aware of vocabulary. I'm aware of the words that I use, and very often I'm called out not only on uh, making sure that I'm using the right words that they'll get, because you do want to nudge. When I would read books when I was
Mm-hmm.
growing up, if there was a word, it's interesting what you learn, because there are some words that I understood intuitively what the word meant in the context of the
Mm-hmm.
sentence and the story. You just do that. If I didn't know, but if it didn't look too hard, I mean, I might stop to look it up or ask. And then I'm learning. My vocabulary's increasing, and I'm learning as I'm reading, which is the best thing. Because if we do Dick and Jane's sort of vocabulary all the time, and in our writing and keep it so simple as to
Mm-hmm.
almost counter what reading and what story engagement should be doing, which is broadening our worlds, broadening our perspective and our intelligence, one would hope.
Mm-hmm.
That part of it, I think, is important. Um, in terms of, well, you were talking about like checking the boxes in terms of
Yeah.
what we need and all that. Stories, as I said before, are a great supplement.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, for example, when the Augustine Institute created the Word of Life program,
Mm-hmm.
and they had all the catechetical teaching, and they said, here are all the things we're teaching. I looked at it and I said, okay, where are the stories? How can I create supplemental stories that won't just repeat what's being taught in the classroom or by the teacher or by whoever is speaking? I want to give them a sideways look at it. Here's a
Mm-hmm.
sideways consideration about what they are learning over here. And hopefully that's going to give it more meaning. Thus, now we're back to the power of story in the context of any classroom scenario, making time for it, but being intentional in the choices you make. You know, what is it? If we're doing this, then what kind of stories can we tell? What can we do that's going to lift that up even more? Jesus did it all the time. He could proclaim, about love and forgiveness, and then he tells the story.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're going, okay, both together is very powerful.
Yes.
Now we're getting what he's talking about. Is that helpful?
Absolutely.
Is that answering your question?
Absolutely. It's
Okay.
making me fired up because I've got my kids at co-op right now and tomorrow they're home with me. And all I want to do when I get off of this interview is think of ways to implement this into my curriculum, my homeschool. You are absolutely hitting the nail on the head with everything that I hope and dream
Mm,
and pray for my education for my kids.
mm.
And that leads me to a really important question, Paul, which is that a lot of our listeners are going to be hearing this interview and they're going to be really encouraged and really excited and cannot wait to put this into practice in their homes. But some of us are listening thinking, wait, but where do I even start? Do you have any tips or tricks or advice for me, especially with writing and, with storytelling? Parents might feel that it's a little overwhelming to teach this
Well,
and they don't know where to start.
well, it is daunting, and the good news is, even if you're reading, even if you're finding great books, classic books, and I know that there are approved lists. There are lists of things that homeschoolers can look at, use, read in the class. Use that. Ask your kids to tell stories. Just make up their own stories. Give them a chance to use their imagination. I mean, I started when I was in third grade. I think I wrote my first play when I was in fifth grade. It wasn't really a play. It was just me writing out a lot of silly things for two or three of us to do in front of the class. But to me, it actually had a structure. I considered it, and my teacher allowed me to do that. She actually made
Mhm.
time for that because she thought it would encourage us all in a lot of ways. And I
Yeah.
think the starting point then is use the resources you have. I think there's more resources out there than we know.
Mhm.
And there are a lot of good books and stories that could be read. I'm trying to create more and more through the Adventures of Nick and Sam books and
Mhm.
the Virtue Chronicles. Now we're doing a new audio series, so a big part of what we're trying to do at the Augustine Institute, but I know others are doing it, which is to create the opportunity. I would love to begin to write. I'd love to do plays that could be performed by families and
Mhm.
at schools and at Catholic schools. And,
Fun.
I'd love to just create things that would be easy to do almost just hold the piece of paper in your hand and do it. Read it or you can memorize it and really perform it. But all of that, I think, would add to it. In terms of other resources, though, I think you guys have such a great network in terms
Right.
of finding them and for you to place what you know. I mean, as soon as you think intentionally about, well, what am I after and what do I need? Then sometimes it isn't just, I can't think of anything. Well,
Mm-hmm.
think about the stories that you do know and love, the ones that you think would be appropriate for your kids. And look online. I mean, you can always look and connect with, I mean, that's what I love about the homeschool world is because you guys really connect. I mean, you've just got boards and places to go to talk to each other to say,
Mm-hmm.
I'm using this. What are you using?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing. If you put out the word saying, I want to use story more than I am, what books could I read? What are indigestible bits that I could read or have the kids read or perform or whatever the case may be? That's a starting
Absolutely.
point. And by the grace of God, we'll be creating more too. Uh,
Yes. Now that you
because I
spoke,
know there's just not enough out there.
yeah.
And I think that was one of my motivations to go to work with the Augustine Institute to leave. I was
Mm-hmm.
with Focus on the Family, but I really wanted to engage in my Catholicism into the Catholic community as a
Mm-hmm.
storyteller and figure out how can we fill this need? How can we create more
Yeah.
stories that will inspire others to create stories that then we have a lot more resources to use?
Definitely. Paul, now that you spoke it, out loud, I think a lot of your fans are going to be hoping that you do come up with these theatrical scripts that families
Mm,
can read. And I will say that, I was a public school teacher for almost 10 years
mm,
before I decided to have children and homeschool them. And during that time, one, I will tell you, I read the Chronicles of Narnia
mm,
to my students every year.
mhm,
And the second thing I used to do was just the same as homeschool, in a public school, there are times when the kids are especially chatty. They are distracted. Maybe they don't want to focus on whatever we're doing. And something I did, it just sparked in me that it was storytelling. And I don't know that I realized it at the time.
mhm,
What I would do is I would take maybe 5 index cards and I would write words that were not related to one another on them. So maybe I would write ice cream cone, the attic. I would write all different words that were not related and hand a group of, say, 3 or 4 students these index cards and tell them to make up a skit, a play, or a written story using those words.
mhm.
And there it was. It was just those couple of words that were random words were complete launching pads for a story, and they worked collaboratively. So to my friends who are homeschooling and listening to this, a great it could be a 5-minute or a 5-hour activity, truthfully, but just to spark a little bit of a flame in that
Yeah.
storytelling in your homeschool. Such a fun way to get your kids curious and excited, whether you have them work on that independently or in a group of children at your home. I think it's just such a fun way to
Yeah,
integrate
I tell
storytelling.
you, if you wanna get their attention, just start once upon a time, and generally they'll respond, and if you do, because what you just described, I used to do it with
Mhm,
my kids, especially my daughter when they were little. When she was little, I made up stories. I would at
mhm.
bedtime, I would make up stories,
Yep.
and I remember one night opening a book to read to her, and she went, "No, no, no, daddy, you need to tell one with your own mouth."
Yep.
And I knew what she meant, and then she often more so than my son, but she was the one who would do like you did. She would start throwing me things. So I would
Mhm,
say, "Well, once upon a time, there was a girl named Ellie, and she had a cat named," and then I would start, and then they
mhm.
were walking down the street and went to, and she'd say, "The park,"
Yep.
and then they found a kite, and then she'd begin to feed me. So what you're
Mhm.
doing is great because if you're feeding them, all right, I want a story about an ice cream cone. And if you want a little conflict, an ice cream cone that someone accidentally was walking and then dropped it on the ground. What kind of things can you throw at it to make it? But no, it's brilliant. You give them opportunities to tell stories, and then you
Definitely.
tell stories as well. Let them do that to
Mhm,
you. What
mhm.
happens if the
Well,
kids
I
say,
was
"Give me
thinking
random words," and I'll you give me words, and I'm going to try to make up a story using these words.
absolutely. Absolutely, and what you said about just once upon a time starting it, I've played the game with my son before where we each have to make one sentence and add
Yeah.
on to each other's story.
Yes. Oh,
So I
yeah.
might
That's
say,
fun too.
Once upon a time, this happened," and then he'll add to it, and then I get the next sentence, and we
Yep.
keep building, building, building. It
Yep.
gets more nonsensical and sillier as we go on, and he's laughing, and it just turns into, a gaggle of laughter, and
Yeah.
that's the best part because that's, the beauty of storytelling. So,
Yes.
so many opportunities to get started for us homeschoolers on a really relaxed note. It doesn't have to be something that we overthink or make really labor intensive. Just like you said, over dinner, talking about our
Right.
days, the high and low points of our days, starting these stories and having our children add on to them. There's so many opportunities that we have to really
Well,
start
and
this.
most of us are better storytellers than we think. I mean, we
Hmm.
do tell stories all the time. I went to the store and couldn't find a parking spot. I did
Hmm.
this and this. They're mini stories, and they may not structurally be beginning, middle, end, and they may not win awards, but we're telling stories all the time. And so, for those who are daunted by this, I think the real thing is just say, but you're doing it anyway. So, you do that, use that, tell the stories to the kids, let them tell their own stories.
Absolutely. Paul, this has been such an incredible, fruitful conversation. And I am so thankful for everything really that you've taught me today. I can't wait to implement it in my own home. I know you have so many other fabulous things coming for us that you've been working on. And we are going to link to all of that in our show notes so you can learn more about Paul and get access to some of the things that he is creating. But, Paul, share with us what is coming up next for you.
Well, a big part of it is I've been working for several years now on, as I said, it was called Hope Springs. And Hope
Hmm.
Springs is a fictional town in Colorado. Um, and uh, and really it's exploring everyday life, but sometimes various fantastic sort of things. I think our phrase is a world of everyday wonders and eternal mysteries, I think, if I had to summarize it. And so we're exploring Catholicism. Kids, my target age is 11, but I know they're younger
Hmm.
listeners, will be older listeners. But a lot of what we're after is just to engage the imagination, use modern storytelling. There are a lot of saint stories out there, and we just
Hmm.
thought, well, what would happen if we just did modern day stories in this fictional town with a group of kids who are really interesting, but also represent our listeners. So what we've done, I've created The Adventures of Nick and Sam. I've mentioned that, and
Hmm.
that's a
Hmm.
series of first reader books. There's older books called Virtue Chronicles, which ties in, by the way, all of this stuff ties into Hope Springs. It's kind of like, well, I want to say maybe a bad example is, the world of the Avengers,
Hmm.
you have individual stories, but it's part of this big world. And it's the same thing here. So we are coming out with an audio drama, and it's fully
Awesome.
produced. We have multiple actors and music and sound effects. So it's not a podcast or a book on tape. So I say book on tape. Now I'm showing my age. Um, and so what we're going to do to test this a little bit, because we've recorded a bunch of episodes, is
Hmm.
we're going to put them where select people can listen to the first couple of episodes, and then if they would kindly go to this link and do a survey, that would be hugely helpful to us, because we're trying to distribute this, but we realized, well, where are people listening to the things like
Hmm.
this? Are they in the car? Are they at home during meals? Are kids listening on a device in their own room? I mean, where is the engagement going to be? And what kinds of stories should we be telling and themes should we be approaching? So,
Wonderful.
if I could give you this and you can post this, but what
Yep.
we're going to do is we can invite your listeners to go to its pilot.hopesprings.org. So it's pilot dot HOPESPRINGS, hopesprings.org, O-R-G.
Hmm.
And you'll post this so it'll be easier. But if they
Yes.
can go there, then they'll have the opportunity to listen to the first couple of episodes and then
Hmm.
maybe do this survey for us. And then we're also, offering some prizes for participation of some sort.
Awesome.
And
Yeah.
then, of course, we're going to let everybody know when all of the episodes will be out. We've
Very
actually
exciting.
recorded our first season of episodes. So there are 10 episodes that have been produced. We're in production on the second batch, and I've just finished writing the third batch. And
Mhm.
so we're trying to get ahead of it so that when we release this, hopefully in January, so everybody who does this is getting a sneak preview. But when we actually release in January, it'll be out there for everyone to find and listen to.
How exciting. Paul, thank you so much. I definitely am looking forward to that sneak preview and taking a look at all of that. Like I said, the links will be in our show notes below. Paul, this has been a great conversation. Thanks so much for spending some time with me today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thanks.
This isn't the end of the conversation. I want to hear from you. Come say hi on Instagram, connect with me on Facebook, or leave a comment below. I want to know what today's conversation sparked in you. I read and respond to every message. Until next time, remember, you got this.